There's something about watching a man break that stays with you. I'm talking about that moment when everything he thought he was just crumbles. And I'm gonna tell you about the 12 codes that separate the men who break from the men who bend but never snap. These aren't motivational quotes or gym mantras. These are the quiet rules that unbreakable men live by, whether they know it or not. You know what I realized? Most guys today are walking around without a code. They're reacting to life instead of responding to it. They're letting circumstances define them instead of defining themselves through their choices. And that's exactly why they break when the pressure comes. Because when you don't have a code, you don't have an identity. And when you don't have an identity, you're just floating. I watched my neighbor last week. Good guy, works hard, loves his family. But his teenage son looked at him with this expression I'll never forget. It wasn't disrespect exactly. It was worse. It was indifference. Like his father was just another voice in the background noise of his life. And I thought about what that kid was seeing. Was he seeing a man with a code? Or was he seeing someone who just exists? Do you agree with that? Or does it sound completely wrong to you? Look, if you're here because you want to understand what makes some men unbreakable while others shatter at the first real test, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to share isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming solid. Picture this. You're 8 years old and you're watching your grandfather fix something in his garage. He doesn't curse when the wrench slips. He doesn't throw tools when things don't work the first time. He just adjusts, tries again. There's this quiet certainty in the way he moves, like he knows something you don't. Like he's operating from some internal manual that you can't see, but you can feel. That's what a code looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's just there, like gravity. You don't question it. You don't negotiate with it. You just live within it. I remember the sound of my father's alarm clock every morning at 5:30. Not because he had to be at work early, but because that's when he got up. Every day. Weekend, holiday, sick day, didn't matter. 5:30. And there was something about that consistency that made the whole house feel more stable. Like we were built on bedrock instead of sand. You could feel it in the way he closed doors. Never slammed them, never left them hanging open. Just closed them, deliberately. Like even the small actions mattered. Because to him, they did. There's this moment every morning when you first open your eyes. For about 3 seconds, you're not fully yourself yet. You're just aware. And in those 3 seconds, you get to choose who you're going to be that day. Most people never realize they have that choice. They just roll into consciousness and let the day happen to them. But a man with a code, he feels that moment. He recognizes it, and he chooses, consciously, to step into his identity. Not the identity that circumstances want to give him, but the one he's built for himself, code by code. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Our grandfathers had something we've lost. They had rituals. Not religious necessarily, though sometimes that too, but daily rituals that reinforced who they were. The way they shaved, the way they walked, the way they spoke to their wives, the way they handled their tools. Everything was intentional. Everything had meaning. They didn't just live their lives, they crafted them. And that crafting created something inside them that was unbreakable. Not because nothing could hurt them, but because their identity wasn't dependent on external circumstances. Today, we're drowning in options and starving for structure. We've got endless choices and no framework for making them. We can be anyone we want to be, which sounds liberating until you realize that without a code, anyone usually means no one in particular. I see guys my age scrolling through their phones at dinner while their kids are sitting right there. And I think about what those kids are learning about manhood. They're learning that attention is negotiable, not because someone told him to, not because he read an article about it, but because his code says that when you're with people you love, you're fully there. That's not a rule he has to think about. It's just who he is. Think about this. When your great-grandfather made a promise, what did that mean? It meant something, right? It meant that unless he was physically unable to keep that promise, it was going to happen. His word wasn't just sounds coming out of his mouth. His word was a piece of his identity that he was giving away, and he knew he'd have to live with whatever came next. That's code. That's what made men unbreakable back then. Not their muscles, not their jobs, not their money, their word. Because when your word is solid, you're solid. But somewhere along the way, we started treating promises like suggestions, commitments like rough estimates, plans like maybe, probably, if nothing better comes up. And then we wonder why we feel so unstable, why everything in our lives feels temporary. Here's what I've noticed about unbreakable men. They have this quality that's hard to describe, but you recognize it immediately when you see it. They're not trying to prove anything to anyone. They're not performing their masculinity or broadcasting their strength. They just are who they are, consistently, quietly, without apology or explanation. You know that feeling when you're around someone and you just naturally speak a little more carefully? Not because you're afraid of them, but because you respect them. That's what happens when you're in the presence of a man who lives by a code. He doesn't demand respect, he just earns it, constantly, through small actions that add up to something unmistakable. I think about the way my uncle used to talk to waitresses. Same tone he used with everybody else. Polite, direct, kind. Didn't matter if she was young or old, attractive or not, having a good day or a bad one. He treated her like a human being who deserved his basic decency, not because he was trying to be a good guy, but because that's what his code demanded of him. That's what we've lost. We've lost the understanding that how you treat people when there's nothing in it for you reveals everything about who you really are. Let me tell you something about strength that nobody talks about anymore. Real strength isn't about what you can lift or how loud you can yell or how many people are afraid of you. Real strength is about what you can carry without complaining, what you can endure without breaking, what you can lose without becoming bitter. My grandfather lost 3 jobs during the Depression. 3. And you know what he did? He got up every morning, put on his cleanest shirt, and went looking for work. He didn't rage about the unfairness of it all. He didn't blame the government or the economy or bad luck. He just carried it, like it was his responsibility to bear whatever life handed him without letting it change who he was. That's what a code does. It gives you something to stand on when the ground underneath you starts shaking. I see men today who have never been tested. Not really. And they think they're strong because nothing has broken them yet. But that's not strength. That's just luck. Strength is what happens when everything goes wrong and you discover that there's something inside you that can't be touched by circumstances. Something that exists independent of your job, your bank account, your relationships, your health, your reputation. Something that's just you. The irreducible core of who you are that remains solid no matter what happens around it. But here's the thing most people don't understand about codes. They're not about rules you follow when it's convenient. They're about who you are when no one is watching. When there's no reward for doing the right thing and no punishment for doing the wrong thing. When the only thing holding you accountable is you. That's when your code matters most. That's when it reveals whether you're actually living by it or just pretending to when it suits you. I remember being alone in a hotel room on a business trip years ago. Found someone's wallet in the hallway with about $300 cash in it. Nobody around, no cameras I could see. No way anyone would know if I just kept walking. And for about 10 seconds, I actually considered it. $300 for doing nothing. But then something inside me said no. Not because I was afraid of getting caught, but because taking that money would make me someone I didn't want to be. Someone whose integrity was worth $300. And that realization hit me hard because I understood that my code wasn't just about big, dramatic moments. It was about small, private choices that nobody would ever know about except me. That's where your character lives, in the space between what you could get away with and what you actually do. You want to know what makes a man unbreakable? It's not that nothing can hurt him. Everything can hurt him. Loss, betrayal, death, failure, disappointment, grief. All of it can cut him just as deep as anyone else. But none of it can change him. None of it can make him someone he's not. Because his identity isn't built on what happens to him. It's built on how he responds to what happens to him. And that response comes from his code. I've seen strong men cry. I've seen tough guys break down and admit they're scared. I've seen confident men acknowledge their mistakes and ask for help. And you know what? None of that made them less unbreakable. If anything, it made them more so. Because they could experience the full range of human emotion without letting those emotions define them. Weakness isn't feeling fear. Weakness is letting fear make your decisions for you. Weakness isn't failing. Weakness is not learning from failure. Weakness isn't being hurt. Weakness is letting hurt turn you into someone you don't respect. A man with a code can feel everything and still choose who he wants to be. Here's something I've learned about modern men that breaks my heart a little. They're so afraid of being seen as toxic or aggressive or outdated that they've forgotten how to be anything. They've become so careful about not offending anyone that they've stopped standing for anything. But having a code isn't about being aggressive. It's about being intentional. It's not about dominating others. It's about governing yourself. It's not about being inflexible. It's about being reliable. There's a difference between being strong and being hard. Hard breaks under pressure. Strong bends but doesn't snap. Hard is brittle. Strong is resilient. Hard is reactive. Strong is responsive. And that distinction matters because life is going to test you. Not once, not twice, but constantly. And the question isn't whether you'll face adversity. The question is whether you'll meet that adversity as the man you chose to be or as whoever circumstances force you to become. This is where most men fail. They let external pressure determine their internal state. Market crashes, they become anxious. Relationship problems, they become bitter. Career setbacks, they become defeated. They're basically emotional ping pong balls, bouncing around based on whatever hits them last. But a man with a code? External circumstances might affect his situation, but they don't affect his identity. He remains who he is, regardless of what's happening around him. Not because he's indifferent to pain or loss, but because his sense of self isn't dependent on external validation or success. Let me paint you a picture. It's Sunday morning, and you're getting ready for church. Or maybe you don't go to church, but you're getting ready for whatever Sunday means to you. And as you're getting dressed, you catch yourself in the mirror. And for just a moment, you ask yourself, who is this person looking back at me? Is it someone with a code? Someone who stands for something. Someone who would make the 8-year-old version of yourself proud. Or is it someone who's just getting by? Someone who's adapted to circumstances instead of living by principles. That moment of honest self-reflection is where transformation begins. Not with big dramatic gestures or public declarations, but with a quiet recognition of who you are versus who you want to be. And here's the thing about codes. They're not inherited, they're chosen. Your father might have had a code. Your grandfather might have had a code. But that doesn't automatically give you one. You have to decide for yourself what you stand for, what your non-negotiables are, what kind of man you're committed to being, regardless of what it costs you, because it will cost you. Living by a code always costs you something. Opportunities you won't take because they don't align with who you are. Relationships you'll lose because you won't compromise your principles. Money you won't make because you won't do certain things to earn it. But here's what you get in return. You get to respect yourself. You get to look in the mirror without flinching. You get to know that whatever happens to you, you'll face it as the man you chose to be, not as whoever circumstances made you. That's what makes a man unbreakable. Not the absence of pressure, but the presence of an identity that can withstand pressure. Think about water for a minute. Water can carve through stone given enough time. Not because it's harder than stone, but because it's consistent. It doesn't stop being water just because it encounters resistance. It just keeps being water. And eventually, the stone yields. That's what a code does for you. It makes you like water, soft enough to flow around obstacles, persistent enough to wear them down, and always, always remaining essentially yourself. I know men who've lost everything: jobs, marriages, health, money, reputation, everything. And some of them were destroyed by those losses. They became bitter, angry, defeated. They let their circumstances rewrite their identity. But others discovered that there was something inside them that couldn't be taken away. Something that existed independent of all the external things they thought defined them. And they rebuilt their lives from that foundation. Not trying to get back what they lost, but creating something new based on who they really were underneath all the roles and possessions and achievements. Those are the unbreakable ones. Not because they didn't break, but because when they did break, they broke clean. And then they rebuilt themselves according to their code. You know what I think is the most dangerous thing about modern life? It's not the obvious dangers like violence or disease or economic collapse. It's the slow erosion of identity that happens when you stop paying attention to who you're becoming. When you let convenience replace principle. When you let comfort replace challenge. When you let other people's expectations replace your own standards. You drift. One small compromise at a time. One little exception to your values. One moment of taking the easy path instead of the right path. And before you know it, you're living someone else's life according to someone else's code. Or worse, no code at all. And then something happens. A crisis, a loss, a moment of real testing. And you reach inside yourself for that solid core you thought was there. And you discover nothing. Just a collection of habits and reactions and borrowed opinions. No real foundation, no true north, no code. That's when men break. Not because the pressure is too great, but because there's nothing inside them strong enough to withstand any real pressure at all. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can choose, right now, to start building that foundation. To start living according to principles instead of just preferences. To start becoming someone who could handle whatever life throws at you without losing yourself in the process. Here's what that looks like in practice. You start small. You make your bed every morning, not because anyone cares, but because that's what a man with a code does. He handles the small responsibilities before he takes on the big ones. You keep your word, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient, because your word is your bond and your bond is your identity. You treat people with respect, not because they deserve it, but because that's who you are. You don't let other people's behavior determine your behavior. You let your code determine your behavior. You face problems directly instead of avoiding them. Not because you enjoy conflict, but because avoiding problems doesn't make them go away. It just makes them bigger. You take responsibility for your life, your choices, your circumstances. Not because everything is your fault, but because taking responsibility is the only way to have any real power to change things. You develop skills, not just to make money or impress people, but because a man with a code believes in being useful, in being able to contribute something valuable to the world. You take care of your body, not for vanity, but because your body is the vessel that carries your code through the world. And you owe it to yourself and the people who depend on you to keep that vessel in good working order. You learn constantly, not because someone requires it, but because the world is changing, and a man with a code adapts without compromising his core principles. You're honest, especially when it costs you something. Because integrity isn't about being honest when it's easy. It's about being honest when it's hard. You're loyal to people who've earned your loyalty, and you don't withdraw that loyalty just because circumstances change. Because loyalty isn't a business transaction. It's a character trait. You protect what matters, not through violence or aggression, but through presence, attention, and commitment. You show up, you stay engaged, you don't check out just because things get difficult. And you do all of this, not because you're trying to be perfect, not because you think you're better than anyone else, but because this is who you've decided to be. This is your code. This is what makes you, you. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When you start living by a code, something changes in how other people see you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. People start trusting you more. They start coming to you for advice, for help, for stability. Children feel safer around you. Women feel more secure. Other men feel more confident. Not because you're trying to project strength or leadership or authority, but because those qualities are natural byproducts of living with integrity. When people can predict how you'll behave based on your principles rather than your moods, they relax around you. They know what to expect. They know they can count on you. And that's when you realize that having a code isn't just about you. It's about the ripple effect you have on everyone around you. The way your consistency creates stability for others. The way your reliability becomes something people can build their lives around. Your children see what it looks like to live by principles. Your spouse sees what it means to be with someone whose love isn't conditional on circumstances. Your friends see what loyalty actually looks like in practice. Your coworkers see what integrity looks like under pressure. You become, without trying to, a reference point. A reminder of what's possible when someone chooses to live intentionally instead of just reacting to whatever happens to them. But here's what I want you to understand about this process. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more yourself. The code you choose should reflect who you already are at your core, not who you think you should be to impress other people. Because authenticity is part of being unbreakable. You can't maintain a code that isn't genuinely yours. You can't fake integrity indefinitely. You can't pretend to have principles you don't actually believe in. So the first step isn't learning what the code should be. The first step is discovering what your code already is. What do you actually believe in? What do you actually stand for? What would you actually be willing to sacrifice to maintain? Not what you think you should believe in. Not what other people expect you to stand for, but what's actually true for you when you strip away all the external noise and look honestly at who you are. And maybe you discover that you don't have a code yet. Maybe you realize that you've been living reactively, letting circumstances and other people's expectations drive your decisions. That's okay. That's actually the beginning of wisdom, because you can't build something real on a foundation of pretense. Better to start from nothing than to start from something false. I think about my father's hands sometimes. They were always clean, always steady. He worked with those hands for 40 years, but he took care of them. Kept his nails trimmed, his knuckles free of grease when he came home from work. Not because he was vain, but because he believed that how you present yourself to the world matters. That cleanliness and order weren't just preferences. They were expressions of self-respect. That was part of his code. Small thing maybe, but it said something about who he was. It said he cared about details. It said he understood that everything you do either builds or erodes your identity. It said he was intentional about even the small things. And when I think about what made him unbreakable, it wasn't his strength or his intelligence or his success. It was the accumulation of thousands of small choices that aligned with his principles. The daily practice of being who he said he was, even when nobody was watching. That's what we're talking about here. Not dramatic gestures or heroic moments, but the quiet discipline of living according to your code when it would be easier not to. When there's no immediate reward for doing the right thing and no immediate consequence for doing the wrong thing. Those are the moments that define you. Those are the moments that make you unbreakable, because when the real tests come, when the pressure is enormous and the stakes are high, you don't rise to the occasion. You default to your training. You become who you've been practicing to be in all those small, private moments when nobody was paying attention. And if you've been practicing being someone with a code, someone with principles, someone with integrity, then that's who you'll be when it matters most. Not because you suddenly become heroic, but because you've been quietly heroic all along. So let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, at least to yourself. If someone followed you around for a week, watching everything you do, listening to everything you say, observing how you treat people when you're stressed, how you handle responsibilities when you're tired, how you respond to temptation when you think nobody will know, what would they conclude about your code? What would they say you actually stand for based on your actions rather than your words? What principles would they say guide your decisions? What kind of man would they conclude you're committed to being? And more importantly, would you be proud of their conclusions? Would you respect the man they described? Would you want your son to grow up to be like that man? Would you want your daughter to marry someone like that man? If the answer is yes, then you're already living by a code, even if you've never articulated it clearly. And the next step is to make that code more conscious, more intentional, more refined. If the answer is no, then you have some work to do. But that's not a condemnation, it's an opportunity. Because once you see clearly where you are, you can start moving deliberately toward where you want to be. And that movement, that conscious choice to live according to principles instead of just impulses, that's what transforms you from someone who might break under pressure into someone who bends but never snaps. The thing about being unbreakable isn't that you never feel pain or doubt or fear. It's that you feel all of those things and still choose to act according to your code. You let your principles, not your emotions, drive your decisions. You let your values, not your circumstances, determine your behavior. And over time, that creates something inside you that's solid. Not rigid, not inflexible, but solid. Like a tree that can bend in the wind without falling over. Like water that can flow around obstacles without losing its essential nature. That's what you're building when you live by a code. That's what makes you unbreakable. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of something inside you that's stronger than any challenge you'll face. And here's the beautiful thing about this process. Once you start living this way, once you start making decisions based on principles instead of convenience, something shifts in how you see yourself. You start respecting yourself in a way you maybe never have before, because you know that whatever happens, you'll face it as the man you chose to be. That self-respect becomes a foundation for everything else. Your relationships improve because you're not trying to get validation from other people. Your work improves because you're motivated by excellence rather than just getting by. Your health improves because you understand that taking care of yourself is part of taking care of your responsibilities. Everything gets better when you have a code. Not easier necessarily, but better. More meaningful, more purposeful, more yours. And that's what we're really talking about here. Not becoming someone else's version of a strong man, but becoming your own version of an unbreakable man. Someone who lives according to principles he's chosen for himself, who can be counted on to do what he says he'll do, who treats people with respect regardless of what he gets in return, who faces adversity without losing himself in the process. Someone who, when the tests come, and they will come, stands firm, not because nothing can hurt him, but because there's something inside him that's more durable than hurt. Something that existed before the crisis and will exist after it. Something that defines him more than any temporary circumstance ever could. That's what a code gives you. That's what makes you unbreakable. Not invulnerability, but integrity. Not the absence of pressure, but the presence of principles strong enough to withstand pressure. And the beautiful thing is, you get to choose. Right now, today, you can decide to start building that foundation. You can decide to start living according to principles instead of just preferences. You can decide to become someone who could handle whatever life throws at you without losing yourself in the process. It won't happen overnight. Building character never does. But it will happen, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one test at a time. Until one day you look in the mirror and recognize the man looking back at you. Not as someone you're trying to become, but as someone you've already become through the daily practice of living according to your code. That's when you know you've made it. When you've become unbreakable, not because nothing can touch you, but because whatever touches you can't change who you fundamentally are. Look, I know this isn't easy to hear. In a world that tells you to be flexible, to go with the flow, to adapt to whatever circumstances demand, talking about codes and principles and non-negotiables can sound old-fashioned, maybe even impossible. But I've seen what happens to men who have no code. I've seen how they drift, how they compromise, how they slowly become people they don't recognize. And I've seen what happens when life really tests them, how they crumble because there was nothing solid inside them to begin with. And I've also seen the other kind, the ones who know who they are and live according to that knowledge, the ones who can be counted on, who can be trusted, who remain themselves regardless of what happens around them, the ones who, when everything goes wrong, somehow become even more themselves. Those are the unbreakable ones. Not because they're perfect, not because they're stronger than everyone else, but because they've built their lives on something more solid than circumstances. They've built their lives on principles they chose for themselves and committed to maintaining regardless of the cost. And that commitment, that daily choice to live according to your code, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult, that's what creates the kind of strength that can't be broken by external pressure. Because it's not external strength, it's internal strength. It's not about what you can do to the world. It's about what the world can't do to you. It's about maintaining your identity, your integrity, your sense of self, regardless of what life throws at you. And that kind of strength, that kind of resilience, that's available to anyone who's willing to do the work of defining their code and then living according to it. Day after day, choice after choice, test after test, until one day you realize that you've become unbreakable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can make you someone you're not. Nothing can compromise your integrity without your permission. Nothing can force you to abandon your principles unless you choose to abandon them. And when you reach that point, when you've built that foundation, everything changes. Not your circumstances necessarily, but your relationship to your circumstances. You stop being at the mercy of whatever happens to you and start being the author of how you respond to whatever happens to you. That's freedom. That's strength. That's what it means to be unbreakable. So if you found value in this conversation, if it made you think about what kind of man you want to be and what kind of code you want to live by, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because this is just the beginning of a much deeper conversation about what it means to be a man in a world that's forgotten what that actually means. And remember, being unbreakable isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent. It's about choosing who you want to be and then becoming that person through the daily practice of living according to your principles. The 12 codes we talked about today aren't rules someone else created for you. They're a framework for thinking about what your own code might look like, what your own principles might be, what kind of man you might choose to become if you took that choice seriously. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us can do. Choose who we want to be and then do the work of becoming that person. One decision at a time, one day at a time, one test at a time, until we look in the mirror and see someone we respect, someone we're proud of, someone who could handle whatever comes next without losing himself in the process, someone unbreakable. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next video that's going to appear right here on your screen.